Hi, Amber. Welcome to Good Movie Monday. It is really great to be chatting with you. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So, on today's show, we're talking all about serial killer biopics, and I think there's always been this fascination with serial killers and true crime. Is it? Have you been a fan of the genre, for lack of better word?
Not at all. No.
Really, really.
Yep, yep. I consider myself an outsider to the genre, which is kind of why I was curious about doing it. When I first got the script, my thought was like, wait, me and a Ted Bundy movie? Like that seems very odd. And then I read the script and I had a take and I was drawn in and I thought, well, you know what? I'll go and I'll meet with the producers and I'll give them my take and either, I mean that's how it is when you're doing what's called pitching on jobs. You go and you pitch your take and either it's a match or it's not. And then it was. And so then, once we started talking about the material and what interested me about it, then it grew and it became interesting. But I always felt myself to be an outsider to the genre, and that's kind of what I liked about the approach for me. I find it boring to do the same thing over and over again. I like to do, explore all sorts of worlds. I mean, that's part of why I think I became a director, maybe why other people do it too, is that we like to learn about people other than ourselves, different from our own lives.
Yeah, right. Well, I think you've probably jumped into it at the right time because like the world is just obsessed with serial killers probably now more than ever before, and maybe the pandemic's got something to do with that. That people are at home and they have the time to sort of dive into this really weird and bizarre world of true crime. So when it comes to serial killers, Ted Bundy takes the cake, and I'm not
Does
meaning to
he takes the cake?
I'm,
Okay.
I'm not meaning to glorify him, but I guess there is this fascination and an attraction to his infamy because of how charismatic and intelligent he was. Did you feel an obligation not to sensationalize or romanticize him?
Well, so first thing I would say is I don't find him that charismatic or intelligent, actually. I think that's
Right.
part of the mythology around him. I think he was of average intelligence. I mean, maybe slightly above, but I think he was more deeply insecure, really liked attention. I see him more as kind of like an incel guy, like, we have that term now. I think he just wanted everybody to like him and be fascinated with him and be interested in him, and he had a real desperation. I find his looks as well to be really average. I mean, people like that mythologizing. Oh, he was a rock star. He was so intelligent. He was so charismatic. But actually, if you do as much research as I did
Mm.
into who he was and look at every photo and every bit of video that's out there, he was really needy and quite desperate and really deeply insecure. Um, so that's my lens, at least. That's the lens that I approach the film with. I mean, it's interesting when you talked about people being kind of obsessed with serial killers now. I mean, I think, look, there's so many different ways of looking at that. And certainly one can say, I'm as guilty as the next because I made a serial killer movie, right? But at the same time, certainly there is, I think, an unhealthy obsession with that kind of thing. And I think there are, certainly audiences and filmmakers who I think maybe do get too obsessed and do start to make these people into rock stars. And that I do think gets unhealthy. But then I also think there's another side of being interested in this genre that's really, comes from a good place of humanity. I think it comes from, not only our own fears of dying and being killed and bad things happening to us or our loved ones, right? We all are human. We all know what that feels like. But I also think it's the kind of what we call the rubbernecking when you're driving on the freeway and you see a car accident and you turn to look. I do think there's a very human kind of compassionate part of like, oh God, I hope they're okay. We are genuinely caring about others, and we all know fear, right? And I think
Mm.
particularly women know that feeling of walking down a street and hearing footsteps behind you and it's at night and you're scared, and so I think that's something that yeah, that is just kind of universal, is worrying about other people. So I guess I'm like all that to say that I like to think that a lot of the curiosity about these people in this world is more to do with caring about others than it is necessarily enjoying, glorifying these awful crimes.
I suppose, yeah, you're right, absolutely. And I suppose there's maybe just that also the distance of time, like the 80s and sort of the 70s, these kind of killers saturated our media landscape, whereas they don't so much anymore. So maybe we're looking back, with that comfort of, they don't really exist to
Oh, the
that
comfort of
degree anymore.
distance. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. I mean, I think everything was so different then. We didn't have the internet, right? So we had to rely on whatever the newspapers and magazines and television, what were
Yeah.
they called out of the desk? News reporters, they would cut whatever they're putting out is what we got to consume. And it's so different now. We're making different choices. So I'm sure there are serial killers that are well known today. I'm not a fan of the genre, so I don't
Yeah.
seek them out. I mean,
I
I
guess.
think but we'll also, just one more thing. Sorry, I'm like just keep cutting you off. But I also think that with Bundy, it's also kind of a cyclical thing. Like fame begets fame. It's kind of like the Kardashians. They became famous, and then everyone was talking about the fact that they were famous, and then that made them more famous. And so I think that's sort of the deal with Bundy as well, is that because so many people have a take on him, and then everyone has a take, and then everyone has to comment on that take, and then people have a reaction to that take, and it just kind of becomes a cycle. And I think he's one of those people that has gotten into that fame cycle, and it's not
Yeah.
necessarily that he's more interesting or more worthy of examination than anyone else.
I guess that was the crux of Oliver Stone's Natural Born Killers, really, wasn't it? Just looking at how we glorify them. But like, let's talk about Luke Kirby here because he is incredible. Like, I love this guy in general, but his take on Bundy I found to be just insanely accurate. Can you talk about his approach to the role, or even what kind of direction you gave him to conjure such an uncanny sort of reflection?
Well, he's so great, isn't he? I mean, I'd been a fan of his for years before, and he just popped into my head. You start thinking about, well, God, this is such an
Mm.
iconic person who's going to play this, and he just popped into my head, and I was like, oh my God, it's got to be him. And we had so many other wonderful actors interested in the part, but I just was like, no, it has to be Luke. And Luke actually turned us down at first, and I was like, no, I gotta hunt him down. So I did. I found friends that knew him, and forced him to. No, I didn't force him, but we went for a walk together, actually, in the very early months of the pandemic, an outdoor socially distanced walk. And we just hashed it out, and we talked, and it turns out that a lot of the insecurities that he had about playing Bundy, I had those same things about making a quote unquote Bundy film. I mean, we
Mm.
actually like to call this more of a Bill Hagmaier film than it is a Bundy film.
Sure.
But Luke was just wonderful. I mean, there's so much about his process that you should ask him that's particular to him, and I don't like to really
Mm.
pry into that too much with actors. And I think there's some of it's kind of like sacred, kind of private stuff, as well as some of the stuff that I do with my actors, right? Some of that is kind of between us forever in the vault. But he, all I can say is that he did such thorough research, and, he's just one of those great actors that can mimic the voice and the body and the physicality, as well as giving a great performance. So we did so many. I mean, it would take now more longer than we have for me to sort of talk about my process and our process, but Luke's just got the goods. He's got the talent, and I think he did a fantastic. He's definitely the best Bundy. I've been pleased to see so many lists saying he's the best one, and ours is the best Bundy film. And I'm like, ego is like, yes.
Well,
There
look,
have been so many.
I think you should take a lot of credit too, because I think your approach to him and his character was really clever and effective, because you picked the right camera angles and sort of obstructions to mask whatever sort of Luke Kirby isms were in there, and I think that was a really, really excellent way to approach it. A lot of directors wouldn't do that, so take that as a compliment for sure.
Oh, well, thank you. I don't know if you noticed, but what I was trying to do was copy a lot of the very, the most iconic images that there are of him out there. We kind of recreated a lot of that. One that I really wanted to do that's in the trailer, but didn't end up in the film, is the under the table. I don't know if you know that shot of him where it's kind of the camera's like at his feet and it's going up the table, and he's looking down the lens. And we tried to recreate that shot. It ended up that, what the space of the room and the shape of our table and the shape of our lens, it didn't look the same. So it didn't quite work. But that's one thing we tried to do, was sort of take these iconic photos of him and use, similar angles and lenses. And yeah.
Awesome. And Elijah Wood, I can't think of an actor with more integrity. Like, he also produced the film. What's he like to work with as a creative partner behind the camera?
So lovely. He's just the sweetest guy. He's so giving and sweet and easy to work with. And again, just so talented. I mean, anything you throw at him, he can do. And he's great. Yeah. I mean, we had such a great team. I like to talk shit about people, and sadly, I don't have any shit to talk. Can we swear on this? I'm sorry.
Yeah, totally.
There's no shit to talk with this crew and cast. They were all really, really wonderful, and I think, it was the first time a lot of us had been out of lockdown. We shot it during the pandemic, and so for that first 6 months of the pandemic, people, at least in Los Angeles, were really not leaving their houses and not seeing anyone. So this was the first time that we'd been like around others. And so we all were like, human beings exist and we can still make films. And so I think we all felt very blessed to be there and really happy to be working and making art. And so it was a really, as weird as it sounds, making a serial killer movie, it was a really lovely experience. And there was a lot of laughter and joy on set.
Excellent. I think when it comes to Elijah Wood, I think that the choices that he makes are really bold and audacious, and it's a compliment to anyone that he chooses to work with. So I would take that as a compliment.
Oh, I did. I already have planned, if I ever win an Oscar, in my speech thanking him. So don't worry.
Look, to address sort of like the elephant in the room for some viewers, would be that your film came out shortly after the Bundy tapes did on Netflix, and I guess there's a, for want of better phrase, there's a saturation of Bundy out there. But I do think that yours is probably the best of them. Were you aware of those other projects at the time? And were they on your Were they on your mind?
I mean, I Googled, I was like, how many movies with Ted Bundy? And I did both documentaries, series, narrative, everything. And I made a list and who directed them. And one thing that was interesting is that there was only, as far as I could tell, the genders, there was only one other made by a female director. And that to me felt really important. I was like, this story is not just about these men that do these atrocious things. They're doing these atrocious things most of the time to women. And it really is about power and power over women and gender imbalances. And that, the female side, the female story is a big part of this story. It's not just like Ted Bundy's story, it's also the women's story, and their lives get cut short. And so to me, I feel like that, we talked about earlier, the walking down a dark alley and hearing footsteps, like that's a very female experience. I'm not saying no men have ever experienced that. Certainly they have. But I would say almost every single woman I know has experienced that. Walking at night, you hear footsteps, you get scared, holding your keys so they stick out of your fingers. So, all that stuff that we're all taught how to protect ourselves, So that feeling of being hunted down is really very much, in the female realm. And so I've just felt like that was part of the story. I feel like I've drifted away from your original question.
No, I'm glad you said that. No, I am really glad you said that, because I get that from female directors of these type of films. There is a different sensibility here, and I interviewed Mary Harron about her doing serial killer films, and she had the exact same response you did, and I think that resonates. That resonates for the viewer, and I think your film, as opposed to the other ones that are out there, gives the audience a lot more depth than what the others do.
Well, thank you. I mean, those other films, I never like to gripe on another film. It's so hard to get a movie made, and and I admire anybody who gets a project off the ground, and I think all we can do is bring our own take to it, and I think that was the most important thing to me, was that I was bringing something different to it. And I felt like, as we started talking about, right, me being an outsider to this genre was something different, and me being a woman was something not completely unique, but slightly unique, in that only one other woman had made a Bundy film. So I felt like those were things that I was like, all right, well, and I also thought that my take on Bundy was different. I saw him, as we started talking about in the beginning, I didn't see him as this kind of amazing, charming guy. I saw him as quite pathetic and desperate, so that's all you can do is try to there's an expression that people say, like, there are no new stories, we're all just regurgitating the same stories over and over again. And so if that's true, and it probably is true, then all you can do is really bring your own set of life experiences and opinions and thoughts and feelings and your own sensibilities to the project, so that was what I tried to do. I was like, look, if this is going to be another Bundy film, there has to be a reason. It has to be saying something new. And to me, that really was, the very subtle part of the film of like, well, what's it like for the women in the room, because there were women in the room in all those moments. Bundy did not exist in a vacuum. And
sure.
Yeah.
Well, if that was your intention, mission accomplished. As I said, fantastic film. And before I let you go, because we're just about out of time, you are working on another film called Nod If You Understand Me, I believe, if IMDb is correct. What can you tell us about that film, if you're able to at all?
Well, I'm actually making another film first that I can't say anything about yet, but it will
Okay.
be announced publicly in a couple of weeks that I'm very excited about. It's my first studio film, so that one will happen first, and then Nod, If You Understand, will come after that, and that one is, yeah, it's about the very famous airplane hijacker that everyone knows as DB Cooper, and it's I love this one too, because again, it's looking at that sort of story that's been told before and really delved into a lot from a new angle. And that really is the angle of the stewardess who was on that plane with him, was the one who interacted with him. And really, once you hear the whole story, she was the one that saved everybody's life. I mean, she was just an amazing, amazing woman, Tina Mucklow. And so she's working with us. She's, you know, part of the project and telling her story, and the producer writers have just done an amazing job, and I can't wait to tell that story, because yeah, it's that's something that I like to do, is take a story that's out there that people are fascinated by and interested in, and go like, but wait, what about this angle? No one's ever looked at it from this angle, and I think no one ever has looked at it from Tina's angle. You know, she was 21 or 22 years old, brand new to being a stewardess. Like, she'd had the job for a couple of weeks, gets on this flight, it gets hijacked, and she's the one that has to like liaise and negotiate with him, and save the day and save everybody's life. You know, I think people have been so preoccupied with who is DB Cooper that they've missed, like, there was a basically like just out of teenagehood young girl who literally
Yep.
saved everyone's life. Like, that to me is just as interesting as a story as to who was he, you know.
Absolutely, and I think you've successfully piqued people's interest. I'm sure everyone's going to want to see that. I certainly do. But look, we're out of time. I wanted to thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. It's a real pleasure for me. I just love the stuff you do, and I'm looking forward to both those projects.
Well, thanks so much. It's great fun. I love talking film, so thanks for having me.
You think you're smarter than him. You think you're going to be the one that's going to get him to confess.
Well, I don't think I'm smarter, sir. I don't think you necessarily have to be smarter.
This is what's going to happen. He will come down. He'll toy with you for a little while.
Does your son know what you do?
He knows his daddy protects people.
He will cat and mouse with you. He will make you think you are getting somewhere.
Let's record and let's get this party started.
It is February 13th, 1986. This is Agent Bill Hagmeyer. I'm sitting with Theodore.
No, Ted.
I'm sitting with Ted Bundy.
Ted Bundy has 13 hours to live, and he is using those hours to try and buy himself more time.
He's ready to talk. He said he's ready to confess to everything, but only talk to one person. There are families out there looking for answers.
The world needs to know why he killed those girls.
You're some hotshot young upstart, and I'm your next big case. You're going to be the guy who broke me. There are a lot of myths and misunderstandings about me.
What are you going to tell me?
Everything.
What do you think he wants?
You and I will sit down and have the conversation you've wanted this whole time.
When you get too close to a guy like this, you can lose your way.
Do you think you could kill somebody?
I'm an FBI agent.
That's not what I'm saying.
You can't hold these girls hostage.
I'm not playing games.
How many did you kill?
Let's say 30.
Let's say we talk about the real number.
30 is a nice round number. You're getting inside my head.
I'm looking for understanding.
You think they should kill me, don't you? You think it's my time to die?
Frankly, they probably should have done it a long time ago.
I'm going to take you somewhere that I've never taken anyone before. I need a moment with Bill. He's my best friend.